Medical tyranny has been going on for decades in our country, and it's been getting worse. And let me tell you what I mean by medical tyranny. Medical tyranny is when a hospital says to a nurse, you can't work here unless you get a flu vaccine. It's when a legislature passes a law saying you can't enroll your children in school unless your kids get 50 vaccines. It's when a doctor says to a parent, if you don't give that child Risperdal for his behavioral problems, we're going to turn you into Child Protective Services. And this has been going on for decades. It's been getting worse year after year after year. And so sooner or later, something bad was going to happen. I had no idea it was going to be something like this, but we were careening toward disaster before this ever started. And in the book, I write about this. There's a chapter called The Perfect Storm. And the perfect storm for medical tyranny to do what we're seeing right now is 4 things have to happen. You have to have public education creating generations of stupid people. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to have a media that is completely not curious about looking into anything. I mean, the 5 major broadcast networks take in tens of billions of dollars every year from the drug companies, and they can be told to report almost anything, and they will. And I'll tell you a great story to let you know how much the media is not really reporting anything of value anymore. Our newspaper here in Columbus is the Columbus Dispatch. We call it the Columbus Disgrace, all right? It's printed in Indianapolis and brought over here for delivery in the morning. So let me tell you what happened. The day before Thanksgiving, on Wednesday, 6 o'clock in the morning, the newspaper comes. And about 5 minutes later, another big bundle lands on my porch. And I think, it's probably the Black Friday ads, right, that they forgot to deliver. It was, along with the Thursday newspaper. Now, do you know how much fake news it is when you print the newspaper on Tuesday night that you're going to put out on Thursday? They're not even trying to pretend anymore that they're reporting anything, right? So anyway, so you've got to have an education system producing stupid people. You've got to have a media that's very compliant and willing to lazily report anything handed to it. You need a government that's increasingly intrusive and people putting up with it. But most important, you need an irresponsible medical system that is used to lying to people. It's used to overcharging people, and no discipline whatsoever. And I'll tell you what I think is the epitome of what the medical system has been like. And it's what happened with the opiate epidemic. You know, we have an epidemic of addicted people in this country, and people like to point to the pill mills and that sort of thing, and they were responsible for part of it. But a good deal of it was that Purdue Pharma hired pretty girls who used to be cheerleaders in high school. And I'm not kidding, you can see this as part of their hiring practices. And they went out and they told doctors that there was an epidemic of untreated pain in the United States, and OxyContin wasn't addictive. And a significant number of doctors, a few 100,000 of them, said, okay, and they started prescribing. And when you have a group of people who are that uninformed, irresponsible, and so on, something bad is going to happen. The opiate epidemic was just a fraction of the disaster that these people are capable of creating. And we're living in the midst of the disaster that they helped to create right now.
Was there a reason or a turning point for you personally?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what happened. What got me interested in the health business in the beginning was fortunately not a personal health catastrophe. You hear that a lot. The reason why people decide to get into the health business is they had stage 4 cancer, their father did, and they found out they could eat their way out of it. That's not what happened to me. What happened to me was I was very not health conscious, actually, as an adult. And I was a sales trainer. Nothing to do with health, my prior occupation, which I think is helpful. To be in the healthcare business with a business background, we probably need a little bit more of that, right? But in any case, what happened to me is I read an article in a magazine one day that I thought was kind of interesting about how diet could influence your health. And I don't think anybody would deny that diet influences your health, but this is 1994. Nobody's paying any attention to this kind of thing. And so the idea that cancer would be diet related, I mean, that was just mind-blowing to me. So I did a little bit of research. And I read a book written by a doc in California who'd been helping people recover from serious disease, including multiple sclerosis, for years using diet. And you know how you think you're really smart and educated? I thought I was really smart and educated. And so there's a part of you that says, how could I have missed this? And what else don't I know about all of this? So it just started me down a path of looking into healthcare and health. And at a certain point in time, it's like, gosh, I think everybody should know about this. And so that's how I ended up starting this company. And who would have thought that you could create a large international business with the simple concept of we're just going to tell people the truth about health, all right? And then we're going to show them how to look into health-related matters so that they can make better decisions even without us, which is what we do for our people. And so that's sort of how this came about. Informed medical decision making, learning how to buy health care, all things related, the diets you eat, the supplements you take, the tests you have, the drugs you take, the procedures you agree to, the vaccinations, with the same diligence that you buy everything else that's important in your life. When this all started, and I started talking about what's really going on with this COVID situation, I think one of the interesting things, here we are, 8-9 months later, is that our clientele already knew something was wrong because we taught them to be skeptical about all things medical. So in the whole time that this has gone on, we've had 3, not 3%, because that would be a big number, 1, 2, 3 people who have expressed their displeasure with us for the stance that we've taken on this. But everybody else in our clan, if you want to call it our membership, our clients, has understood from the get-go what was going on. Most of the criticism we've gotten is from people who have never been educated by us, who believed what they were told by the media and believed what they were told by medicine, because people still believe in medicine. I don't think you should believe in anything except facts and information. But anyway, so that's how we started getting involved in this in the first place, is digging into it to report to our members accurately what was happening. So unfortunately, people who have been habitually what's the word I'm looking for? Obedient to the medical system. They think that, oh, my doctor is the head of the department at the local medical center, so he must know what he's talking about or what she's talking about, and therefore I should follow instructions. Those are the people who've been hurt the worst by this, both psychologically and otherwise, because they've believed what these people were telling them. Oh, I knew what was going on. And I'll tell you an interesting background story on this. So in 2009 and 2010, the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control declared a fake pandemic. They already did it. It was a dress rehearsal in some respects. So what had happened, some people might remember that that was the year the swine flu was supposed to kill everybody. And there was a lot of fear about it, and people were being encouraged to get a vaccine that was developed rather quickly, not as quickly as the one for this, but developed rather quickly. And they actually said that this thing started in Mexico, so they were going to test anybody coming into the United States from Mexico, whether it would be somebody visiting from that country or coming back from a vacation or an immigrant, etc. And so an interesting thing happened after all this, publicity and everything else. In about February of 2010, January, February, the CDC and the WHO said, we're so overwhelmed with swine flu cases, H1N1, that we want you to stop testing. And the reason is we just want people to focus on getting treatment. So if somebody shows up in your facility and they say that they have the sniffles or a headache or a fever or whatever it is that they're complaining about, just assume that they have H1N1 and treat them and send them on their way, all right? And I thought at the time this was very strange. And what I said, I wrote an article, and you can see in our library, it's time-stamped that it was before investigative reporters got involved in this. I said, there is no epidemic. They're worried about that, so they're telling people to stop testing so they can keep the appearance of the epidemic. Well, after this whole episode was over, CBS News did an investigative, this was before the media got really lazy. They actually looked into it, and they used the Freedom of Information Act to get data from every single state health department on how many cases they had and all this sort of thing. And the bottom line is there was no epidemic. People coming in from Mexico didn't have the swine flu, the H1N1. So the bottom line was it was a manufactured epidemic. Here in the United States, nothing really bad happened except some bad publicity for people like the folks who work at the Centers for Disease Control or the FDA, a little bit of bad publicity for WHO. In Europe, it was a little bit worse. The estimate was that $18 billion got squandered worldwide on this fake pandemic, and there were some hearings and that sort of thing, but nobody really ever lost their job over it. A real interesting comment was made by Margaret Chan back then, who was the Director General of the World Health Organization. She said that pandemics are excellent opportunities. I'm paraphrasing here, but pandemics are really great opportunities to do social engineering, and we shouldn't let them go to waste. And boy, we should have paid more attention to that comment. So when this started back in March, and they were going to flatten the curve or whatever the heck they were telling everybody back in March, I knew that this was wrong. I knew something else was afoot. I had no idea it was going to turn into what it turned into, but I knew at that moment that there was no pandemic, that this was manufactured, and that bad things were going to happen. Had no idea how bad, but I knew bad things were going to happen.
And what would you say are the three top reasons you'd tell someone who's not the uninitiated or those that don't know that didn't immediately realize there was something up with this? So, I mean, what are the kind of three biggest points you'd make to them?
Why I knew?
Like that? Why?
Well, they did it before.
Going on?
They did it before. I have this strange idea that past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. And then I'll tell you another thing. When Fauci showed up in that first press conference, my heart sank. Many of us knew about Fauci and his criminal deeds for a long, long time, and he never paid for it. I mean, nobody ever gets fired when you work for the federal government. You can do almost anything. And so when he showed up, I knew bad things were going to happen because he had done so many terrible things during the HIV/AIDS crisis. So between the fake pandemic of 2009 and 2010 and Fauci showing up as the person in charge, by that point in time, I knew that disastrous things were going to happen, and they did.
It seems like he would be the right corrupt official to hire.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what he did. You know, it's interesting, again, past behavior being a predictor. There's a chapter in the book called, by the way, Meet the Players. And every single one of these people, Robert Redfield, Deborah Birx, Fauci, all of them, Gates, Tedros, they all have histories that, if you really took the time to look into them, would make you very, very, very concerned. But what happened during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and why some of us knew from the get-go this was going to be awful, was, first of all, Fauci cooked up this crazy idea that turned out not to be true, that HIV causes AIDS. And then he predicted that tens of millions of people were going to die. Start to sound familiar, right? Unless we could come up with a vaccine in some warp speed fashion. He didn't use that term back then. But it turned out that it was kind of inconvenient data coming in. 4,600 and some people who had AIDS-defining diseases weren't HIV positive. So he made up some other kind of condition to call them so he could move them out of the data set and keep this crazy idea he had going on. And as a result of his misdirected attention, there still isn't any vaccine for HIV, and it's a virus that most people clear anyway. A lot of people did die of AIDS who didn't have to. Okay, so it was his irresponsibility, but it doesn't end there, all right? In the rush for a cure, as it turned out, Burroughs had a drug that they had tried on cancer. They were going to make it a cancer drug. It killed all the lab animals. Actually killed all the lab animals, so they didn't even patent it. You know how bad a drug has to be when the company doesn't even bother to patent it, right? So they didn't even bother to patent it. And Fauci and his buddies at Burroughs take this god-awful drug off the shelf, put it in a clinical trial for AIDS patients. It became known as AZT, which is pretty much no longer used because it didn't take long for the affected people to find out that the drug was actually killing their people. Remember the Dallas Buyers Club? That's what that movie was all about. It was a real true story behind that. Matthew McConaughey played the lead. And so they were going to Mexico to bring drug cocktails back because they knew that AZT was killing AIDS patients. All right, so
it's just a high octane chemo, right?
Yeah. And as if that's not bad enough, as if that wasn't bad enough, after he got this drug approved to treat AIDS patients, he decided to do a clinical trial on pregnant women who were HIV positive. And they stopped the trial early because I think there were 13 babies in the intervention group who were not born HIV positive. They did no follow-up to see that any of these kids were going to be okay after their mothers were exposed to this awful drug while they were pregnant. And that became the standard of care for HIV positive pregnant women. I mean, it's just unconscionable. So that's what he did before. And his sister actually made a comment to a magazine one time that the problem with Tony is that once he gets his mind fixated on an idea, facts won't change his mind. And that's certainly what we're dealing with now, you know.
Maybe briefly describe the divergence between public health and real health policy?
Yeah, so let's talk about public health. I think, first of all, public health as we define it today, it isn't anything. In other words, let me tell you what I mean by that. So who gets a job in public health, like to lead the Ohio Department of Health? A medical doctor who has political aspirations, not somebody who actually knows something about public health. There's a really interesting book called The Social Transformation of American Medicine, and this is really important, I think. It's a great book to read if you want to know why we're in the mess we're in right now. But public health used to be about what it says, public health. How do we improve the health of, like, the community, the whole population? And so at a certain point in time, public health officials were doing really good things. And I'll give you some examples. Cleaning up the water supply. I think it's really great that we're not getting cholera anymore. That's a public health initiative, all right? Another thing they were doing is going into the schools in underprivileged areas and finding kids who had no dental care. I think that's a good idea, right? And at some point in time, it stopped being about initiatives that actually promoted community health and that sort of thing. And it started being about power. You know, people say that they're in public health when they're with the FDA or the CDC or the World Health Organization. None of those organizations are into public health, and they're all funded by drug companies, right? So the idea of public health, where you're looking at how do you do the best job you can for the most people, that's totally lost. And you can see it here with the policies around COVID-19. They're designed to kill people. Really, I mean, that's a strong accusation to make, but nobody's ever been able to explain to me how public health or anybody's health improves by taking an 80-year-old person and depriving them of human contact until they give up their will to live. That's the type of behavior you would expect from Nazis, not from public health officials.
Yeah, I mean, just the stories we're told. I mean, can you just comment on the credibility of these policies?
Well, there is no credibility for the policies, and there's no science to back them up. And if anybody brings up any science that refutes them, it's taken down. It's taken off of YouTube. The mainstream media will not allow anybody with a contrary opinion to have a voice. And that should say something. I mean, the first thing somebody should be suspicious of is when everybody you talk to has the same opinion about anything, because when in history has that ever happened, right? So the mere fact that you are told the same thing by all media outlets is concerning. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of these montages that have been created where they'll have all of them speaking in unison, like they all were reading from the same script, right? Because they were all reading from the same script that somebody gave them. So it'll say something to the effect that, you know, cases are surging and all of the counties are becoming purple or whatever, and then it'll show you like 900 newscasters saying exactly that. Well, how does that happen? It has to be coordinated, right? So there is no scientific debate. There's no room. And really what healthcare should be about is the best ideas in healthcare moving forward, because they're proven to be the best ideas, not about we've decided in advance what we're going to do and just let the chips fall wherever they may. And once in a while, they'll put something out that actually explains what's going on, like Redfield, the head of the CDC, actually testified in front of Congress that I think it's 25% of adolescents and young adults have thought about killing themselves. Think about what that means. And they're still wanting to lock everybody down and keep kids home from school and no sports and the whole 9 yards. So think about how unthinking people have to be to listen to that and say, yep, we're definitely on the right track. We should, the people who love these lockdowns and everything else, good to go. With 25% of our young people wishing they were dead, we got a great thing going on. It's unbelievable. And so back to your point, what is public health? Do you think public health is putting adolescents and young adults in a place where 25% of them would like to kill themselves? Do you think public health is about older people dying alone without human contact in a nursing home. You know, there's a new thing they're putting on death certificates these days for nursing home deaths. It's called failure to thrive. This is where old people just give up their will to live and stop eating. In Canada, older people can do assisted suicide. And I covered this in a video clip, a woman who opted for assisted suicide instead of staying by herself alone in her room in the nursing home. And we think that's okay? Seriously. That's murder. That's committing murder when you indirectly, when you drive people to do this. And I won't rest until we prove that these people have not only committed fraud, but that they have been responsible for deaths and they should be criminally prosecuted. That's a strong accusation to make, too.
So do you think all these public health officials are wittingly doing these things, or they're just arrogant, or?
I think that it's impossible to, at this juncture, you and I are having this conversation in December, it is impossible for this to be done without understanding what you're doing. And many states don't even have a health department director right now. I mean, our emperor hired somebody, I think it was back in September. She was on the job for 5 hours and quit. And I have to believe that part of that decision was because she realized she wouldn't have a medical license if she actually did this. And a bunch of them quit. I think it was 14 states lost their health directors in one weekend. And I think that was people who had a bit of a conscience and said, yeah, you know, I think I'd better get out. But they're not going to skate because they should have known better. Ignorance is not a defense. I didn't know that it was against the law to kill people, so I don't, you know, so I did. And I mean, you don't get to plead that in a court of law.
I guess I'm curious, like, what do you think's going on exactly? Like, the orders are coming from on high. They're going through
They're very
WHO,
coordinated. They're very.
This is the local health department.
This is all very coordinated because that's why you saw our emperor shut down first, and then California did it. And then have you noticed the curfews all started happening at the same time? And then the outliers, you can tell who the governors are who aren't compromised. DeSantis in Florida is not compromised because he opened everything back up and he said, we're not going to do this anymore. And then the woman in South Dakota, she's not compromised. So you can tell exactly who's compromised because everybody else is in lockstep. So when we had the lockdowns originally, restrictions, you didn't have a curfew, okay? The curfew's new, and they all did it at the same time. So yes, it's
so
very.
How do you explain that?
Oh, it's coordinated.
So it's some kind of corruption issue?
Oh, it's absolutely a corruption issue. This was planned. We have the documents that show that it was planned.
Okay.
And the Nazis could never have done what they did without a lot of help from German citizens. And the German citizens who helped the Nazis weren't rabid Nazis, nor were they rabid Jew haters. They were just people going along to get along, okay? And the Nazis very gradually inflicted more and more restrictions and rules and that sort of thing. And even Jewish people started going along with, well, listen, if I got to wear a star on my arm to go get food, okay. Well, what was actually happening was a descent into despotism. I mean, letting terrible criminals run the government and take control of people's lives. And so I think it's really important for people to understand what's at stake. When you put that mask on, you're helping them. All right, it's a sign of submission. That's what they want you to do, submit. When you cooperate this, when you close your business, when you say to your grandmother, I'm going to put you in a circle in the yard and you're going to eat in the cold with a heat lamp, okay, you're participating in this kind of, it's nonsense. Think about what you're doing. I mean, again, it's just nonsense, and it all helps this perpetuate. So I'm encouraging people to understand what's going on and what's at stake. I mean, if you like the way you're living right now, keep cooperating, okay? If you don't, you need to step outside of cooperating and grow a spine and start helping the opposition and the resistance, because had that been done earlier in Germany, the Nazis never would have gotten away with what they did. They were helped by passive citizens who let it happen, and that's what's happening now. Well, it's all volunteer. There are no laws. I've never put on a mask since this started. We've never worn masks in this office since this started. There are people who never close their businesses. There are restaurants in this area that have never closed. They don't have any plastic partitions, and they've just gone on about their business, okay? refuse to participate. If everybody did that tomorrow, it would be over. Because what would they do? Think about this. I don't know how many businesses there are in Ohio, but probably more than 1 million. If 1 million people said, we're open, what are you going to do with 1 million people plus their employees? Seriously, what would you do? Nothing. You'd do nothing. You'd say, well, apparently we're done. It's meaningless. So they're only getting away with it because people are allowing them to get away with it.
Yeah.
And if people would force the issues, so there's a guy in California who runs a restaurant, a big one, and he never closed. He's never been closed for a single day. And there are no plastic partitions, and the bar is open, and the place is packed, and the whole 9 yards. And they've been in there, and they've fined him, and they inspect, and they issue fines, and the whole 9 yards. And he basically says, let's go to court. Let's have a jury trial. So why haven't they done that? This guy's flagrantly breaking the law, supposedly, all right, violating the rules. You could make such an example out of him. So why don't they want to do that? Because what do you think is going to happen when they get into a court? There's no law that allows them to do this. And a jury, a good jury is going to say, you had no right to put this guy out of business for months at a time. So they don't want to go to court. They don't want that, all right? So again, if everybody just stopped complying, then it would be over. That's why when we were testing the little emperor driving all over the state for the curfew and he wouldn't arrest anybody, he strengthened the mask mandate. Supposedly you were supposed to shut down businesses that didn't have masks the second time there was a complaint. We sent teams of people in the big box stores, no masks, walk right past the person and then call themselves in while there's people screaming and hollering the whole 9 yards. Couldn't shut down a big box store to save our lives, all right? So they don't want to go to court. They cannot really deal with any kind of legal ramifications because they can't defend what they're doing. So they're counting on compliance. The Nazis counted on compliance too, and they got it. So just think about that.
So what kind of stuff does it take to say no when the majority of people are going along with it? I
think what you have to do is look at your character. I don't understand this idea that it is so important for me to fit in that I'll destroy my family, I'll destroy my community, I'll destroy the next generation. Think about what you're doing. Look around. 25% of adolescents and young adults want to kill themselves. You're helping with that. I live across the street from an elementary school, and I see these kids crying about the masks and the whole 9 yards. Get on YouTube for once in your life and do some research and watch the people being labeled as terrorists because their 2-year-old wouldn't put a mask on a United Airlines flight. You're helping with that, all right? More people have filed for unemployment than ever before. Businesses are closing. 80% of the restaurants in Ohio won't survive unless something changes. Feel good about yourself about that, right? I'm helping to close businesses. I'm helping to bankrupt people. We're supposed to have another 500,000 or so homeless people in Ohio shortly. Feel proud of yourself that you're facilitating that. Feel great that that's going on. And I guess I'm doing the same kind of shaming that these people do. You're going to shame me because I'm not wearing a mask? And you have no feeling of personal responsibility that you're helping to contribute to this? Really, okay. Now, I think that, so the first thing is I think there's some people who really need to understand their role in this. And I'm tired of them shaming us for staying in business, for protecting our families, for protecting our incomes, for protecting our dignity. But what I would say to the middle group of people who are saying, I know that this is wrong, but I'm afraid, okay, I think sometimes you have to look at what is the alternative. If I don't stand up, where are we going to end up? We're going to live in a communist country. And then what are you going to think? I wish I'd done it, right? I think a lot of people in Germany, while they watched what was going on, while they watched their friends and neighbors being hauled off to camps and that sort of thing, someplace in the back of their mind, they must have been thinking, I wish I'd spoken up earlier. I wish I'd done something before it got to this point. So this is your moment to really be a patriot, to stand up for your country, to stand up for your friends, your family, your community, your state, your country. And we need you to do it. We need everybody to do it. We're not going to be able to get the sheep to do it because they're too mentally damaged at this point in time. But those of you who understand what's going on, we need for you to get involved.
And what kind of effects will all these measures do if we don't stop it?
If we don't stop this, the goal is to make us all wards of the state. I mean, that idiot that runs the World Economic Forum actually says, this, you can read this online, you will own nothing and you will be happy about it. So think about that. You going to be happy with that? I'm not. Okay. I'll fix this or die trying. That's my stance on it.